On today's episode of the Halliday Wine Companion Podcast, I'm joined by Philip Rich, who's a wine critic, writer, retailer, educator, and show judge with over 40 years' experience in the industry. He's also a member of the Halliday Tasting Team. Today we're going to talk about drinking for work versus drinking for pleasure, how to buy wines for a restaurant and write a wine list, Burgundy, and more. But let's start at the beginning. Philip, what was your first job in wine?
First job was in the, I don't remember exactly, early to mid-80s. I was at uni and I walked into Crittenden's. In those days, they gave Roseworthy graduate, or people doing Roseworthy, they had a little sort of internship for them. I sat a test, I passed it, and I spent a summer being trained by Crittenden's, which was really good because after that, I could basically walk into any bottle shop in Melbourne. I go, do you have any work? And they go, no. They go, where did you work? I go, Crittenden's. They go, when can you start? So it was good. It was a good little summer working there.
Did you go to Roseworthy?
No. I was just lucky that they only took on Roseworthy people in between years.
Right.
But they said you can sit a test, and obviously I was already interested in wine. I hadn't worked anywhere, so it was good.
Awesome. That's a pretty good first job. So it's really, you only ever really worked in wine?
Pretty well. No. I had all sorts of weird jobs when I was at uni. I had a job picking up eggs in the Yarra Valley and delivering them to health food stores around Melbourne. I had some really weird jobs, but that was my first one that I really enjoyed.
You know, when did you decide to make wine your career?
Oh, that came much later. So I finished an art history degree in the late 80s at Monash, and I really wanted the career to be working in galleries. I worked in an incredible gallery for a year for a guy called Tony Oliver. It's another story. And then gallery closed down during the recession. I was working part-time in a bottle shop in Carlton called the University Hotel Bottle Shop. And they wanted to get rid of the manager. But before they did, the manager of the hotel said, would you be interested in being the manager here? I hadn't really thought about it. But I didn't have a job, just a part-time job there. So I said yes. But even then, I wasn't sure whether I wanted a career in wine. But that sort of, I did that. I did a pretty good job at this little tiny bottle shop in Carlton, and I was buying interesting wines, and it was the beginning of New Zealand Pinot and all sorts of things. And at some point, I thought, yes, I could see a career in wine.
And how has the wine industry changed, do you think, since you first started?
For me, the main thing is just how much more knowledgeable everyone is about wine. If I go back to the early 90s, and, I was learning about wine, you had to be self-taught. And I was sort of worked because I had a uni degree, so I was used to doing research. But it was all yourself. Now you've got WSET, so most restaurants in Melbourne now have dedicated wine people. That didn't exist back in the 90s. Consumers are a lot more knowledgeable. Just the way information is out there, I think that's made a huge difference. Wine lists, wine was really... it's one of the reasons I took a job at the Prince of Wales with the Van Handels. That was in 96. And one of the reasons I took it was that, food was just so much more important than wine. And sort of early to mid-90s, all of a sudden you started seeing restaurants and wine bars emerging where, wine became almost as much a focus as what food was. And that was pretty exciting. And shortly after I started, the main thing was wine buying for the whole group. So I went to John and Frank and said, I've got this job for the group. Any chance I could become a partner just in the wine store, whatever that's going to be? And I said, sure, but you're going to have to put in some hurt money, which I did. And I gave it its name, and we opened it in, I think, late 96 before we renovated it. Matt Skinner was the first manager.
Yeah, right.
A woman called Jeanette Henderson, who now has a award-winning restaurant with her husband Michael up near Beechworth. She was the first assistant manager.
Little-known restaurant called Providence.
Providence, that's right. Yeah, it was a fantastic time.
So I imagine that, one of the things that I sort of have noticed even in the last 10 years is how much harder it is to source particular wines, but probably easier to source others. When you first opened Prince Wine Store, what sort of wines were you stocking, and what did you have access to that you now would just be like, I can't believe we could stock?
Oh, yeah, well, it even goes before that. So the 2 years before I started at the Prince, I worked after the bottle shop, I got a job working for Dan Murphy's son, Philip Murphy. And I was Philip Murphy's, he sort of gave me my first big break, and I was his imported wine manager. He had a number of stores. And if I go back to, that was 94 to 96, no one was buying, coming out of a recession. Australian dollar was really strong against the French franc. There was no euros in those days, and you could get pretty much whatever you wanted. So, I have lots of stories, but I remember, let's just take one wine. I remember we would get an allocation of like 3 dozen bottles of Coast Jury Merceau. It'd be like 6 for me, 6 for Philip, and I still had 2 dozen to sell to other people. It was a really good time to start in fine wine retail. I was sort of right at the beginning, so I really had access to, things that people just weren't buying them. That's all changed now. A good account would be like if they get 3 bottles of Coach, 2 bottles of Coach. So
was there a market for it?
The market was small, but there was a market. There was definitely a market for it, and that's why Philip employed me to begin with. He'd been told by a couple of friends who were importers, negotiants and domain wine shippers, and they were selling wine directly to people. They said, the time is right now to start selling imported wine. So I sort of got in at the beginning. So I was lucky in that regard. Not just French wine. I was there in the early days of Gioconda, Clonakilla. I mean, I still remember Tim Kirk. Originally, before I went to head office for Philip Murphy, I was at the Turex store, mainly doing French and Italian wine, but also fine Australian wine. And this guy walks in off the street one day and says, "Oh, do you want to look at my wine?" And I'd be like, "Sure, of course." He goes, "Yeah, my name's Tim." I go, "Well, where are you from?" He goes, "I make wine in the ACT." I mean, I didn't even know that they were growing grapes in Canberra. He just pours me this actually, well, I think it was a Clonakilla. It was the Shiraz Viognier, but I think in those days that the first one I bought had Pinot in it, and it's still got Pinot Noir written on the label. I've still got 1 bottle left. Anyway, I bought 3 dozen and put it on the floor, and Tim was still teaching religious studies, I think, at Xavier College. And I still remember a tasting he did. I can't remember who Max Allen was there. I was there. So I got in on the ground floor of, quite a few what are now relatively hard to get Australian wine. So that was also pretty good timing and exciting as well.
Yeah, a bit of a segue, but what were Tim's wines like then compared to now?
Oh, that's a good. Well, I went to, not that long ago, quite a few of us went to his celebrate, I think it's 50 years of Clonakilla, and he put on like every wine he's ever made. They were good back then because my attitude's always been, someone will come in, I'll always have a look at a wine, and in a way it's quite refreshing to look at something that has no reputation because you're just judging for the first time, and if you like it, you go, wow, and then you for me the wines always come first rather than the story. I always think that if the wine's good, everyone's got an interesting story to tell, but not necessarily the other way around. No, I think obviously the wine, it's become one of the great wines of Australia and the world. So yes, vines are older, and he knows, he's learnt along the way. So yeah. Yeah,
amazing. Now, it's no secret that you love Burgundy. Anyone who knows you knows that you love Burgundy.
Yes.
When did you first get to travel to Burgundy, and was that for work or?
It was was sort of work. It was in 97. So Marina, my wife at the time, and I, before we had kids, we went on this. It was sort of my first. I'd been overseas, but not to do wine stuff. So this was the first big one. It must have been in 97. So I already started at the Prince of Wales. So I was able to get good appointments.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing trip. We started off being part of Trembath and Taylor in Italy. So we were in Tuscany, we were in Franciacorta, we went to Barolo. He's passed away now, but a guy called Don Levy Fitzpatrick was with us on that trip, and he was very important in, Melbourne's, food and wine culture, and it was a great trip. And then after the Vinitaly bit ended, we went to southern Rhone, we visited Chateauneuf, then we went to the northern Rhone, and then we ended up in Burgundy, and we stayed in a gîte with Kate McIntyre, the 3 of us, and there was a gîte on the Clos and Jacques vineyard, and it was. I was just thinking about that. One thing we did one day, which I don't think, even having gone there for 30 years now, you couldn't do today. We visited Domaine de Lorme-Conti and Domaine Noir on the same day. I think those 2 visits on the same day would almost be an impossibility now. It was easier to get appointments back then. There weren't as many people going there. Now everyone wants to go there. Everyone wants to visit the great domains.
What is so special about Burgundy, do you think?
I think, and we're seeing it with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in Australia, I think perhaps more than any other variety, Riesling, Nebbiolo also, just its ability to express where it's grown. The fact that, and I always use this one as an example, but there are hundreds. The fact that you can hop on a bike and you can cycle from the middle of Pommard to the middle of Volnay, it might take, I don't know, in a car it'll take 30 seconds, on a bike it might take 3 or 4 minutes, and yet the wines are very, very different just to soil or where they are on the slope. And I just love the fact that, we've got a lot to be grateful to the monks for, because they were the ones that worked out that, vines here ripen, 2, 3, 4, 5 days a week earlier than ones a few hundred metres away, and they kept them separate and they made different wines, and they were different wines. So I think, Burgundy's ability, and Pinot Noirs in general, Chardonnays also, maybe not to the same extent, just to express exactly where it's grown. And it was Mike Weersing who I was talking about a wine one day at a conference, and I talked about it having pinosity, and he didn't have a go at me, but he said, and he's right, that you've got to think of Pinot Noir as the messenger, not the message.
Yeah. So Mike was Pyramid Valley.
He was a Pyramid Valley.
And do you think that anywhere else in the world has those kind of variations in terroir that can express Pinot?
Oh, absolutely. As you know, and as you well know, I cover 2 or 3 regions in Victoria, but particularly the biggest one covers the Yarra. And I think, and obviously I'm a bit biased because I cover that region. I live near there and I've been going there for a long time. But I think what we're seeing, not just in the Yarra Valley, we're seeing it in Oregon and parts of California and Sonoma Coast, winemakers not trying to emulate Burgundy in terms of what's in the bottle or the glass, but certainly taking a leaf out of that book that we have these, even with the Yarra Valley, we have sub-regions, that Woorolloc and Gladysdale and, they produce Hillsville. The wines are different. And you've got a number of producers, lots of them, making 3, 4, 5 different Chardonnays or Pinot Noirs, and you can line them up, and yes, they're made by the same person, so they've got the same thumbprint, if you like, but they're different. They're not the same wine. I think that's, we see it with, you see it in Barolo, you see it with German Riesling as well.
Yeah, for sure. But would you say that's one of the real strengths of Pinot? Like what is it about Pinot specifically that is so special?
I think Pinot is, for me it's, again, perhaps more than any other variety, maybe the only one that sometimes comes close as Nebbiolo. It's just, for me, Pinot Noir is as much about, I almost get as much enjoyment smelling great Pinot as I do tasting it. So it starts right from the moment you put your nose in it. There are wines where you smell it and you think, wow, that's just mind-blowingly beautiful. And then its ability to be both light on its feet, yet have richness and depth at the same time. It's, you don't need to wait for it perhaps as long as some other varieties. It's how good it goes with food that I like eating, so there's lots of reasons.
And how do you think Australian Pinot is performing kind of on the world stage at the moment?
I think very well, both Pinot and Chardonnay. I think our Chardonnay's been world class for a long time, and I'm not the only person or commentator that's said or thought that I think Australia makes the best Chardonnay in the world outside of Burgundy. And I've done lots of lineups where wines are served mass where they perform really well, and I think we're seeing that with Pinot Noir as well. Yeah,
great. And what about, aside from Burgundy, any other regions around the world or even in Australia that you really love or feel really drawn to?
Yes. Well, I've already mentioned a couple of them. So
yes, you've already mentioned a couple.
I've never been to, but I'll have to address that at some stage. I'd love to go to Germany. I love drinking and, all the different, again, regions within and regions, and then drilling down even further with what's in the Mosel or the Nahe or Pfalz or wherever. Yeah. Been to Barolo, I used to, Prince import Barolo, so I love going to Barolo and Barbaresco, and I haven't been back for a while, but I've always loved visiting there. I think it's one of the great places in the world to eat and drink at the same time, and perhaps more affordable than Burgundy. Is becoming quite expensive. And one place I haven't been to, and I'd really love to go to, the Willamette Valley and Oregon. And even when we were doing the course, and I was reading about it, and just that there's quite a bit more Pinot grown in the Willamette Valley than the whole of Australia. So it's mind blowing, and all the AVAs, and I think the Americans are quite good with their system of drilling down. And
it's a very complex system, the AVA system.
I've been to Literai and been to Russian River and the Sonoma Coast and the Napa, the mountain Cabernets, Napa Cabernets, mountain Cabernets, and been there as well. So yes, I'm very open-minded when I went to the Jura for the first time my friend, Jane Eyre, and we do tours together, and I've had a bit to do with her over the years. Anyway, a couple of years ago, we after I finished one of my Burgundy tours, we went down to the Jura for a couple of days. So I'm becoming increasingly fond of those wines, and which go incredibly well with the cheese that's made there as well.
Definitely. So as well as tasting wine for Halliday, you are also wine buyer for Francois and also for McPhee's.
Mm-hmm.
What does a wine buyer actually do? Is it as good as it sounds?
Oh, not really. No, they're different. Buying for restaurants is slightly different to buying for retail. Well, McPhee's core business is building cellars for people and importing things like Eurocarbon, climate controlled. We've always had a small fine wine retail division. I mainly just look after things like I'll write German Riesling offers, Burgundy offers, do host small dinners and tastings.
Yep.
But also, I'm there once a week and we'll have reps come in and show us wines, and so we're looking at Australian wines as well. So it's just, it's always been, I think, philosophy. That's sort of my overriding philosophy. My whole career when it's come to wine is that great wine is made all over the world. So I've always, wherever it's made, if there's good wine, I've wanted to find it, and I've always felt that if you love something, you're passionate about something, you can sell anything to anyone.
Absolutely.
If you believe in it. So that's how I felt when I started, and that's how I still feel.
What do you what is your job, for example, at Francois, buying the wine and looking after the cellar?
Mm-hmm.
What would a normal day look like for you?
Oh, well, I'm going in there straight after this. So, there's now something like, there must be, I haven't worked out exactly, but there's well over 2,000 wines on that wine list. So first thing every week is just looking at what's come off. Like there's not virtually a day in that restaurant's life where something's not coming off and something new's coming on. So
when you say it's coming off, is that because it's been
sold out?
It's sold out and you can't buy it
Oh, sold out, we can't buy it, or it's just keeping up with keeping it. There are certain sections that if you take your eye off it, the Chablis page can go, well, there's 3 of them, but the first page can go from that to that in 2 weeks if you don't have your eye on the ball. So there's that. There's looking for new things to come on, filling gaps. Often I'll be on top of one section, and Joe or Jean-Paul will go, "Hey, Philip, Beaujolais looking pretty slim at the moment. Can you get onto that, please?" And also making sure that you've got all the bases covered, and a lot of it is the wine list is like 60 odd pages. But the first 2 pages are in some ways the most important ones. So we have a thing called the petit carte. So roughly, I always say roughly 70% of the people that come to Francois, they don't want to spend an hour going through 60 pages. They want to open the wine list. There's a page of whites. There's a page of reds. They range from, roughly $70 odd to $300. All the wines by the glass are on those 2 pages. So I do spend a lot of time making sure those 2 pages look really good, and there's lots to choose from at different price points, and all the wines by the glass are good. So that's really important. And then the other 30% will buy off that they want to go through the 60 pages. There wouldn't be many, if any, restaurants in the world with 2,000 plus wine lists on it and no somm. So that's pretty unusual, but you know what, it works, because I always say that of the 30 out of 100 people or 20 out of 100 people that are wanting to go through the 60 pages and go to the Rhone or Burgundy or Bordeaux, 18 out of those 20 people, 7 out of those 20 people are often, they have cellars or their trade or their somms. And there's plenty of guys on the floor that are, they're all French that love wine and, can recommend things as well. So it comes a bit of a team effort.
So when you need to replace, say, Beaujolais on a list,
Mm-hmm.
how do you do it? You got a bunch of importers that you can pick up the phone and say, "I need some wines," and you come in.
Yes.
We deal with
it. Oh, you cannot take it. You can't taste every single thing on the list.
If you've forgotten what Raveneau tastes like, and you just need to have a look.
No, so sometimes, occasionally, you are putting things on the list that you may not have tasted, but people like those wines. You've had them before. They sell well. They move out. So you can see what's moving and not moving.
Yeah.
By and large, you try and stick with producers you like. Buying them from wholesale and people that you like as well. So the 2 sort of go hand in hand.
Do you get free rein, or do you need to get everything signed off?
There's 2 of us. So, Jean-Paul, who I've been there for about 3 years now, but Jean-Paul, the restaurant turns 40 next year, and we've known each other for well over 30 years. He will buy things as well, and he has particular loves: natural wine, Beaujolais, the Jura, Van de France to the Loire Valley. So he'll buy things, but he's never, in the 3 years I've been there, he's never really questioned my decisions and buying, and it's a good relationship.
If you were tasting a wine for Francois and it was a wine you weren't familiar with,
yes,
what are you looking for? Are you looking for a wine that goes well with the food, or are you just looking are you assessing it in the same way that you would if you were reviewing for Halliday?
Nah, probably not. I'm not giving it a score for a start. I'm not writing a review. First thing I look at is it from a section of the wine list that needs filling? Sometimes people will show you wines, you just don't have room for what they're showing you. But I always feel if someone shows me something new that I haven't seen before and I go, this is delicious, I will find a spot for it. I'll always find a spot for something new and delicious. So people are always showing. And there's other things where I go, no, I don't love that. And I know if it's for the petit carte that it's got to tick a few boxes, and it's got to tick. The other box it's got to tick is, you've got to sell it for a price, and you've got to put that on it. And then you look at the wine, you go, people are going to be happy and comfortable paying that price for that bottle of wine. So.
Is your version of delicious different in a restaurant setting than it would be in like a show judge setting or something?
Oh, that's a good question. I always think of myself, I always thought of myself as a lover and a consumer of wine almost. It goes hand in hand. I don't separate the two, if that makes sense. I'm sure that I've bought wines that I think are delicious that, maybe in a Halliday setting or in a show setting, they're not wines that would get 95 points, but it is less relevant.
What makes a good wine list? What does a well-balanced list look like?
Depends a little bit, but one of the things I've always thought is that as a general comment, and there are people who have very specialised wine lists and very niche, and I like niche, but I've always felt that as a general comment that great wine lists are those that they find a balance between what you want to sell people and what consumers want to buy. And if you get that balance right, so if you have wine lists, there are wine lists that people walk in and they don't know one wine on that wine list, and that's fine if people working in those restaurants are passionate and knowledgeable of those wines and are happy to explain it. If I look at Francois, there's people there. If you go to there's Australian section at the back, and if you go there and you want to drink Barossa or McLaren Vale Shiraz, they're there. But then they're the ones I've chosen, not maybe other ones. So in a restaurant like that, which is busy with a lot of people in, so you don't just want to cater to one little section of the marketplace. But there are other restaurants that are, they're very niche and that can work really well.
Now, we just mentioned it briefly, but you've got a lot of experience in show judging.
Yes, I've just come back from Brisbane Wine Show last week, my last one at Royal Queensland Wine Awards.
Yeah, so maybe just give our listeners a bit of an overview of your judging experience, I guess.
At the moment, it's my last year chairing Limestone Coast Wine Show, which I really enjoy. And I think a lot of judges will say they really enjoy doing regional shows because it's a full immersion into a particular region. You walk away and you're sort of familiar with those vintages and those varieties. And the other thing I quite like, one thing I do like about regional shows, you often get producers that not everyone's into, I get it, not everyone's into wine shows and scoring and awards. But one of the things I've always liked about regional shows is producers who will enter, not because they really want to see what their wines are going to score, but they enter because they're supporting their local wine region. I think Woodlands and Margaret River, and for example, or Yeringberg in the Yarra Valley will enter every year. And sometimes they get trophies, sometimes they don't. But I like the fact that they support their wine show, which by extension means they're supporting their local wine region. So I've chaired, I think the first show I chaired was Margaret River Wine Show, and then I think I was the inaugural chair of Pinot Noir Challenge, Mornington Peninsula Wine Show, which they got off the ground, which is going strong now. And I was the second chair, I think, of the James Halliday Chardonnay Challenge after my good mate Ben Edwards, and Yarra Valley Wine Show, and I've done a little bit of judging in New Zealand and did all that. I was sort of there. That was quite exciting. I was there when I think they're called Royal Melbourne Wine Awards now, the Melbourne Wine Show, when there was a big sea change quite a few years ago. When I was there when a Pinot Noir won a Jimmy Watson trophy for the first time. It's not such a shock with Pinots win it now, but it was a big shock. It was a big shock back then. It was a big shock
of everything except for Shiraz won it back then, basically.
Shiraz and Cabernet, generally from South, not exclusively, but there was the odd Victorian or WA wine, but a Pinot never got a look in back then, but they do now. So that's...
With wine shows, would you say, I mean, I know that the end goal is always to sell wine to consumers, but do wineries enter wine shows, is it more for their own, so that they know where their wines kind of are stacking up, or is it?
Yeah, I think that's how it started. I think that's how the wine show started. But I think obviously they've become a marketing tool over the years. So I'm sure there are some people that enter their wines because they just want to see where they fit and sit in the overall scheme of things. It's can be a relatively inexpensive way to get some sort of feedback on what you're doing. But at the pointy end, the Yarrings of this world that win trophies, they're not putting them in to see our wine's good or not. They know,
totally.
They know they're good.
With Halliday, we know quite clearly that we're writing reviews and scores for the consumer to kind of help guide their decisions. But with wine shows, I mean, it feels like it's slightly less consumer oriented.
Oh, I don't know. I think the people that win major trophies, they'll let you know about it via social media and their website. So no, people want to win trophies, and there are good award. There are good prizes now for certain shows. And I think you interviewed Mel recently, and I was in Brisbane a couple of years ago when I think it was the Sexton Pinot won every trophy at Brisbane, and one of the prizes there was like a $20,000 bursary, and myself and Tom Carson were and all the staff at Giant Sets were a beneficiary of that, because she took that money and then spent it on great brackets of Burgundy, and then we did a day of masterclasses where Celador team, Viti team, winemaking team got to learn a little bit about Burgundy. That was a nice thing to do with that.
Yeah, wonderful. But when you are judging in a show or you're reviewing for Halliday, are you assessing the wines in the exact same way, or are you, again, looking for slightly different things?
Not exactly the same way. So for a start, with Halliday, it's not a wine show. We're not looking at the wine's mass. So I always think, not that points aren't important, because they are, and I think people become a little bit fixated on points sometimes.
It's just one aspect.
It's one aspect. I wrote a wine column. I write for Halliday now, but I wrote a wine column for about 17 years for the Australian Financial Review magazine. I never scored a wine once in that 17 years, and I was generally against scoring wine. I would review wines. I have my top 20 wines of the year. Now I do score them, but probably obviously in a wine show they're masked. So you just, one of the beauties of it is, hopefully, one of the nice things is that wine shows will throw up wines that people haven't heard of, because it's a very level playing field. Halliday's slightly different. I always think of the companion, like you said, it's for consumers. It's really, in a lot of ways, yes, you have to be critical when you need to be, but in a lot of ways it's a celebration of the Australian wine industry, and people are buying it because they want to go out and drink and enjoy great Australian wine. Yeah,
so that's kind of what you're in the back of your mind is,
totally.
What would someone think of this wine?
Totally.
What does a wine need to show to score well? What are you looking for Halliday?
That's a difficult question. I suppose another way of looking at it is that with that point score, if I give, for example, 98 to something, then I'm saying this is the best of its kind from this region.
Yeah.
So I do give 98s, as you would know, to Yarra wines. I don't know if I've given a 98 to a Geelong wine yet. I've given them 97s. Yeah. And I always think too, well, then how's that wine? Yes, this is the best from this region, whether it's Pinot or Cabernet or Shiraz, but the back of my mind is also, and I'm giving that score, is how will this wine stack up against Australian wines from other regions of Australia? And then we all come together, as you know, and as a general comment, don't want to give too much away from this year, but as a general comment, some of those wines do really well and stack up well. And also the back of my mind is, and one of the people sometimes like to criticise, they're going, well, if this Burgundy is 98 points, how can this Australian Pinot be 98 points? But you can put those wines into lineups, and I think that the top 98 point wines from Australia on the whole are world-class wines.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I feel like you're well placed to make that call, having all your experience. And when you said before you were self-taught in terms of your wine knowledge. If you were going to, and you've done a lot of education as well, so you've done some sommelier training and then obviously some more written education and things with Halliday Wine Academy and more. If you were going to teach someone how to taste wine,
yep,
mean, what are the mechanics and what do you like? How do you learn how to taste and how to describe?
Like you're talking about from
just basic.
The basics are easy. I always say if I've got I used to really enjoy, like if we go back in the day, I used to have upstairs staff at the Stokehouse. I'd have circus staff, and circus staff obviously were hand chosen, and that was the first manhandle restaurant to have dedicated somms, and we had 2 somms, full-time somms. That's 30 years ago. But if we take, say, for example, downstairs Stokehouse staff, they'd be just a collection of 19 and 20-year-olds, and the first question I'd ask, well, how many of you drink wine? And maybe of 12 people, 6 would drink wine and 3 would drink cocktails and beer. But regardless of that, the very basics are you pick up a glass, you swirl it, you look at the colour, you smell it. And I used to say to people, I still do it sometimes, pretend there's an imaginary whiteboard. What's the first thing that pops into your head? It doesn't have to be wine terms.
Yeah.
Just the first thing, because your nose sends a message to your brain, and I want your brain to send a message back to your mouth. Now, obviously, people are shy and don't want to say anything, but then people would go, I smell petrol, or I smell nectarines, whatever, and sometimes, and you'd end up writing all this stuff on the board. They knew nothing about wine, but you'd have a tasting note there. So it's not. And the other thing I've always been big on with people is always smell a wine before you taste it. You often see a lot of people in restaurants, they'll be poured some wine just to see if it's okay, and then they just pick it up and taste it. So a lot of people don't smell before they taste. So I'm really big on smell a wine, and does the taste follow what you smelled? And the other thing is I've always been big on is smell and taste the wine before you put food in your mouth, and then after you've had food, because sometimes the wines that taste best on their own aren't necessarily the wines that go best with food. So it's not, it's not rocket science. It's just thinking about what you're smelling, what you're tasting, and trying to come up with, start with your own vocabulary, and then if you get into it after that, then it can progress from there.
Yeah, sure. And as someone who drinks wine for a living...
I don't drink wine for a living, actually. I taste wine for a living. I'm actually not that big a drinker, and I've always been a quantity person.
Someone who tastes wine for a living.
I don't drink for a living.
Are you ever able to switch that critic part of your brain off? Do you ever just sit on the couch and just smash it,
It's not even the critic part of me. It's just the wine lover, inquisitive part of me. No, whatever it is, if I'm drinking a $30 wine or a $300 wine, I'm still going to pick it up, I'm going to smell it, I'm going to taste it, I'm going to have a thought about what I think about that wine and its overall balance and its drinkability and what I might eat with it. So no, I don't switch off, no.
Do you have a kind of midweek go-to wine? Like if you were going to buy a $30 wine, what sort of...
There's plenty of $25, $30 good Pinots out there. Riesling's always been great value. I love drinking Riesling. They go with a lot of the foods I like to eat. I love Beaujolais. I think, Burgundy prices the way they are. I still think, Beaujolais underrated and I won't say underpriced, but you can buy cru Beaujolais from great producers for $40, $50 a bottle. I've always liked good Chianti Classico. So there's lots of things I drink.
You live in, Fitzroy. I imagine you don't have an underground cellar because Fitzroy.
No, I don't have.
But do you have a home? Well, do you have a home cellar?
Yes.
And what sort of bottles are in your home collection?
Well, the Burgundies I need to buy to go to the dinners in my wine groups and with friends. So I've always been a big believer that if you love a particular Australian wine, that you buy it every year. To see those differences. So there are things. I've bought kind of Killer over the years. I've bought Applejack. Grenache is the new one. So if you open my Eurocarve now, there's Thistledown and Yangara in there. So as you know how excited we get.
Very excited about Grenache.
We're very excited about Grenache. And so, so there's Grenache would be the newest sort of thing in there. And there's a bit of Barolo in there. There's a few things in there. It's just pretty full at the moment.
Yeah. Do you is that wines that you drink regularly, or are they mostly there to kind
of... Bit of both.
Yeah.
Bit of both. I think one of the things I'll, love about the people I know who are passionate about wine is that some of them aren't with us anymore, but is people, a lot of people I know who have great cellars, better cellars than I have. They've always been incredibly generous in sharing that. I mean, I've been really lucky. I've been in a couple of groups where people that were incredibly generous with the bottles they opened, and got to taste things. And again, started at a time when some of those things were affordable that are no longer affordable. I learnt very early on that the best way to learn about wine is to the first great wine dinner I ever went to that sort of changed my life was 10 vintages of Chateau Reyes from 78 to 90, and I walked away from that dinner. It was sort of life-changing, and I walked away from that dinner realising that I could open one bottle of Reyes, and that was great, and it doesn't mean you never do that. But to see, and there was a golden period for Reyes from 78 to 90. The 89 was there, the 88 was there, the 78 was there, the 90 was there. You sort of walk away with sort of an understanding of Reyes that you wouldn't get just tasting one wine.
Yeah, the vertical tastings really just.
I like horizontals as well, where you might have particular vintage, and you're just looking at one commune or whatever it is, and you've got 7 or 8 wines. That's a good way to drill down to.
Yeah, for sure. All right, I'm just going to ask you some quick fire questions now to finish.
Sure.
So, what's the most expensive wine you've ever tried?
If it was today, would be a 1978 Onegea Richebourg that I tasted in Walter Burke, who's no longer with us, who had Walter's Wine Bar. He was born in 45, and in 95 we did all the 78 DRCs, and then someone put on a 78 Gea Richebourg, which almost blew this. 78 La Tâche is a pretty famous wine. It almost blew all those off the map. So, that wine wouldn't have been ridiculously expensive but back then. But a bottle now, if I had a bottle of 78 Gea Richebourg, it'd be pretty hard to open it, knowing that I could send it off to auction. It's probably worth, I don't know, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, something ridiculous like
Amazing.
that.
What's the most money you've kind of personally spent on a bottle, would you say?
I've been to dinners where I've put in, $5,000, $1,500, $2,000.
And the oldest wine you've tried?
It's the oldest wines, but just being old in itself is not a thing. So if I think about, really memorable bottles, it's interesting that 2 or 3 of them, and they're not Burgundies, have been from 1945. So there's a 45 Leoville Lascasse. I don't really keep empty bottles, but I've got that one that I drank with an old employer of mine, Chris Lucas.
Yep.
I drank that at La Tour d'Argent a few years ago, 2019, I think. That was their last bottle. That was pretty special, and it was a 45 Taylor's vintage port that was pretty good as well. Yeah, so it's been a few very memorable wines.
What about a bucket list wine? Is there a single wine that you are desperate to try and still haven't?
I'm not desperate, but I would love that I've never tasted.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a couple. Same wine, different vintages. So I really love Great Northern Rhone Syrah, and I've one of the great wines is, I've been lucky enough to taste it quite a few times now, is 1990 La Chapelle. And I've never had the 61, 78, but 61's a legendary wine. So, I'm not sure. I've never had that, but that would be a bucket list wine. If anyone's listening and has a bottle in their cellar.
Where are you drinking at the moment? Where's your favourite place to go and have a glass of wine?
Glass of wine or
anything.
Oh, right now, it opened up it's 250 metres from my house. It's dog friendly. I've been there with friends. In fact, I was there last night. I take Hunter in. They don't serve food. They just have Samboy chips. So I get a packet of. So last night I got a packet of Samboy Atomic Tomato, which I share with Hunter. Otherwise he'll start barking. And I have a cocktail there. It's fantastic. So Pendant, if you haven't been there, it's
Pendant.
Pendant's my. Have you been there yet?
No.
No, it's really good. They play country music. The vibe's great. The people are really nice. Cocktails are good. It's really good.
And what about eating? Where's your kind of favourite restaurant?
In your neck of the woods, probably my favourite, just go-to everyday place. And I think you're closer to it than I am. It's still, even from Fitzroy, it's a 20-minute drive. But La Pinta.
Yes.
La Pinta, I love La Pinta. I love eating at bars. I love sitting at bars because you can go by yourself at a bar. You can go with someone else at a bar. Yeah. So I like that. So, I've always liked the bar at Tipo. I like the bar at La Pinta. So, yeah.
And what are you drinking aside from wine?
In summer, I like Americanos and gin and tonics. I like Negronis, but I have made my way through just about all the new cocktails one at a time, not at the same time at Pendant's list. So, yes.
Sounds great. I love the chips. What's your favourite food and wine pairing?
I am pretty partial, and often the way that, I love the way that wine regions, that food and wine evolves out of the same wine region. So, Comte and Van Jones, pretty good. That's always been, I love both, and they work. One almost makes the other taste better and vice versa. That one I've always liked. So, pretty much the traditional ones.
Yeah.
Oysters and Chablis, it's good, although Chablis not, some of these warmer vintages, but there's other things that go well with oysters as well. So Muscadet goes well with oysters and, yeah.
And you mentioned before you studied art history.
Yes.
So when you're not buying wine, what are you sort of spending your money on?
Records.
Yep.
Records are an affordable way to spend money. So I think I've got something, I haven't counted them recently, but I think I've got close to 1,000 records.
Yeah, right.
So it's very hard for me to walk into a record shop and not walk out with a record. But, you're not having to spend too much money. And I still, when I can, buy and collect art occasionally. So, yes,
Nice.
That's a bit of a passion. That's a more expensive passion.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure, Anna.
Before we go, where can we find you on social media?
It was PS Rich, and then Meta deleted my 5,000 followers, and I didn't post anything I shouldn't have. It's just a weird thing. And then I started again. I can get PS Rich back now, but I couldn't. So I just my nickname is Richborg. So I just converted to that.
Well, thanks so much, Philip.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks for listening to the Halliday Wine Companion Podcast. Thirsty for more? Join the Halliday Wine Club for premium 95+ point wines delivered monthly. Visit winecompanion.com.au or check the show notes to subscribe.